I feel like I've done this video before, and I think it's because I did something pretty similar. Not just the one for the New Zealand teams the other day, but way early on in the whole pandemic, there was stories out that the Aussies were going to get a domestic comp underway. Things got more serious than I think they anticipated at the time. Not the only people to be caught off guard for sure, but here we are again, talking about potentially more rugby getting underway. We've already had it from New Zealand the other day that they've confirmed, as our government here in New Zealand lowers the restrictions on people, they are going to get Super Rugby Aotearoa, so Super Rugby New Zealand, underway on the 13th of June. That's the plan. They've got a fixtures list and everything. And now it looks like Australia seems to be following suit. To be honest, I haven't been following daily global totals and whatnot of cases, but from what some of the commenters have said in South Africa and whatnot, not going as well there. So I guess we all hope and pray that things start to get better there soon, and Argentina as well. I'm not sure what the situation's there as well, but the only two countries that I've heard of getting rugby underway thus far is Australia and New Zealand. So the Aussie one seems to have set a target date for early July, so about half a month, maybe 3 weeks after when we get things underway here in New Zealand. I mean, this is all still very best case scenario, I guess, making sure everything goes according to the plan. But aside from the start date, I guess the fact that the Force are noted down to be included is probably the biggest piece of news after notoriously getting cut from Super Rugby. The Force are seemingly a definite inclusion, and that was the story at the start of the pandemic as well, that the Force would be part of whatever the Aussies could get going. However, the Sunwolves are apparently still a question mark. I am kind of surprised they are looking at including the Sunwolves, just given how logistically difficult I think it would be to regather that team with guys based in countries all over the world. It was hard enough for the Warriors, who are a New Zealand Rugby League team, who play in the NRL, which is the Australian Rugby League competition. I forget how many teams are in that competition, but there's a lot, more than 10, 12, 15, I don't know, 12, 14? But one of the teams is from New Zealand. All the others are based in Australia. And they had to charter a flight and get special government permission from Australia to be allowed entry, quarantine 14 days. It was hard enough to get them from New Zealand, which is essentially your next door neighbour, whose rates of infection have been pretty low. That was hard for them to get across the line, but they managed to get it done. So to get the Sunwolves together from literally all over the shop, somehow get them into Australia, isolate them, and then allow them to do some pre-season training, base them in either New South Wales or Queensland was the story, seems unlikely to me anyway. So I would be saying it's probably going to be the Super Rugby teams from Australia plus the Force would be my guess. So yeah, but I mean, that's a bit of good news for the Force. I always had a bit of a soft spot for the Force, so yeah, it'd be nice to see them back in the mix. Time zone doesn't work that well for New Zealand. It's pretty late night games if you're watching the games in Perth, but when I used to live in China, they were perfect because it's pretty much the same time zone. In terms of health and safety stuff, they have mentioned that there would be temperature checks for guys entering training facilities, entering the field, they would be doing rigorous cleaning after anybody's used any equipment. I don't know if you can clean them after the game. That probably doesn't make as much sense. They'll be doing educational sessions for the players to make sure they all, and this coaching staff and whatnot, to make sure they all know best practice. They'll be looking to charter flights to move everybody around. They'll be recommending but not enforcing everybody get a flu shot to reduce the risk of them catching the flu, which also has, similar symptoms. So I think the NRL, which is the league, I believe, I'm not 100% sure, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they made it mandatory that you get a flu shot, and people who aren't keen on vaccinations kind of reared up about that one. But yeah, they said they want to allow between 4 to 6 weeks preparation to make sure everybody is physically, especially the forwards, physically ready to go and they're not rushing anything. They're looking at doing some training potentially this week, I guess in smaller groups, but then maybe kicking things off next week to get things back in line. So, 10-week competition is what they've said. 12 weeks with 10 weeks regular competition. So the New Zealand one is 10 weeks, just 10 weeks outright. And I think it's whoever's top of the log at the end of the 10 weeks is the champion. Whereas by the looks of it, so if I'm reading between the lines, the fact that it's 12 weeks potentially with a 10-round regular season, I guess it's like a semi-final and a final, is what I would assume. I didn't read anything about crowds, but I would assume crowds won't be attending if it's the same as the way they're doing it in New Zealand. I've only read like 3 or 4 of the articles that were breaking this news yesterday and today. So, it's an interesting one. It's another bit of good news, I guess, in terms of having some rugby to watch. I've seen quite a few people actually comment to say that they would get behind watching the Aussies play. Like during the regular Super Rugby season, the Aussie teams catch a bit of stick. That people say I'm not going to bother watching the Aussie teams, but maybe the fact that there's no sports on will get some more non-Australians to watch a bit of the Aussie games, which I think can be a pretty good watch. But I like watching rugby, so there you go. The Force, potentially the Sunwolves, 10 to 12 weeks, health checks, chartered flights, educational sessions, flu jabs, and early July. What do you guys reckon? Would you get behind this? Would you watch it? If it ends up going ahead, fingers crossed, everything kind of remains tracking well in Australia and that we can get this underway. Same with New Zealand. I think New Zealand had no new cases today, which is, again, a bit of good news. But long term, who knows? It's an evolving story. But in terms of the rugby stuff, which I've always mentioned is a pretty small thing in the scheme of things, but for those of us who enjoy spending our leisure time watching the great game, I think it's a bit of good news. But anyway, you guys let me know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.